Hey there, it's Kathy, and you are probably somewhere in week two going through Module 1. And so I wanted to take this time to go over some important concepts in Module 1. For those of you taking the PHR and SPHR exam, Module 1 it has a pretty considerable number of questions for the SPHR. For the SPHR, 30% of the questions come from this section, so it's going to be real important that you understand these concepts. And for the PHR, 11% of the questions come from this section. So again, just wanted to highlight some of the ideas, methodologies that I think that you might see again on the certification exam to make sure that you fully understand those. And so first what I wanted to talk about is HR transitioning into the area of strategic HR management. We've been talking about being strategic HR professionals for some time now, and now I believe, we're making strides in that arena. And the book alluded to things that are pushing us in that strategic direction, like the recession, the shortage for talent, technology, all those sort of things. And so looking at other things that are impacting our profession now, you see the impact of globalization, certainly exacerbated by technology. We've got organizational boundaries that are flexible. We have flexible workforces. We have varied demographics in the workplace now, from 5 different generations being in the workplace to many different ethnicities, races. So it's a real different workplace than it ever has been, which definitely is a good thing, because all of that brings new ideas, innovation, growth, all that sort of stuff. Ethics, the focus on ethics with everything this country's been through the recession, with the meltdown of the financial markets. Ethics, again, are front and center. So all of these external factors really impact what we do in HR. And in order to be strategic in HR, we have to make sure that we keep ourselves abreast of all these things that are changing in the external environment. And a lot of people ask me, how do you keep up with these things? And I try to read and listen to the news and listen to financial reports, and read Fast Company, read Newsweek, Time, anything I can get my hands on, Wall Street Journal. I have my Google set up to where all that news comes into me in one place, so it doesn't take me as long as it used to. But keeping up on our profession as well, what's going on in legislation, what's the best practices in our profession, staying in tune with SHRM and what SHRM is doing, all those sort of things keep us abreast of that external environment. And so with that said, I wanted to talk about different toolkits, tools and resources that we as HR professionals have at our disposal that will help us actually become more strategic. The book did a really good job of mentioning a lot of those, and so I want to go over first the management functions. And if you look at the diagram or the table on page 1-30 of your book, it talks about management functions: the planning, organizing, directing, and controlling. And I've noticed in the past that that's a really good place for them to come up with a question in this section. So I would really encourage you to make sure you understand each one of those. Planning is just forecasting and setting of goals. Organizing is the design aspect. Say you design a recruiting program, a retention program. Directing is when you're scheduling and implementing. I guess you could substitute the word execution there. And then finally, when you're talking about controlling, you're talking about the measurement piece. So controlling equals measurement and evaluation. And so with those management functions said, let's talk about a few tools that will enable you as HR professionals to be more strategic. The first one I'd like to talk about is the project management steps. Project management is becoming more and more important in HR, and I see HR professionals, after they get their SPHR, a lot of HR professionals will get their PMP certification, Project Manager Professional certification. And HR, just like any other discipline, has many projects. HRIS implementation, workforce planning projects, all that sort of thing. And so these basic principles of project management will really assist HR in becoming more strategic in the down the vein of the execution piece. It really helps to make execution easier when you follow some of these principles. So in your book, it did a really good job of mentioning those steps and explaining those steps, defining the problem, gaining support around the problem, plan the project out, implement project plan, monitor, control, and adapt. And then finally, the fifth one is evaluate the outcome, which is that controlling piece of the management functions we just talked about. And so there's a lot of tools within the project management discipline that that you can take advantage of to further help your effectiveness. There's project management software, Microsoft Office Project. I use one called Basecamp. It used to be free on the web. I'm not sure if it is anymore, but our company uses Basecamp. It keeps track of all of our projects and who's on first, who's on second. The book also mentions some tools like the Gantt chart and the PERT chart. Now, just remembering the difference between those two, the Gantt chart is just a visual. You can easily do it in Excel that takes the project steps and plots those over time. So say you're implementing a new HRIS system, your first in the first month you have to find out where all your data is, make sure the data is clean, all those sort of things. In the second month, you might be entering data, designing the system, customizing the system. So it just plans out your project over time so you can see it visually to be able to communicate that to leadership on an as-needed basis. Then the PERT chart is different, as it is visual as well, but it also allows you to see the critical path of the project, or those pieces of the project that are critical to the project success. In other words, if this isn't done right, then these 4 things downstream will suffer. So those are 2 really good tools to be using in that arena. The next one the book talked about was the business case, and I will tell you that as a consultant, the business case is really important. Think about other functional areas of your organization: marketing, sales, finance. Anytime they want to purchase or create a new program or anything to do with resources and spending money, they have to make a business case to be able to convince leadership that this is a good spend. And so the business case methodology, I think, is a solid one. The book went through all the different sections of a business case. Again, much like any other business writing, you're going to state the problem. What are the objectives? What are the potential solutions? So if you're thinking about buying an HRIS, what is the problem? Well, we're spending too much time manually entering data. We have data in 4 or 5 different systems. What are our objectives? To be efficient and effective, to be able to get to all of our data in an efficient and effective way. What are our potential solutions? We can go with vendor A, vendor B, vendor C. What is the timeline from purchase to implementation? How are we going to know we're successful? Those are the project metrics. And so that comprises the steps of your business case. And I highly recommend you becoming familiar with that and even practicing those, because there's going to probably come a time in your career where you want to make a spend in HR and you need to know how to justify that spend. So those are a few of the tools that really enable HR to be viewed more at the strategic level. It's really, I feel, this day and time, it's really about perception. HR went through such a hard last 20 years about being viewed as policy police and being viewed as non-strategic and overhead. And I really feel like that is shifting now. I really feel the tide is turning for us, that the recession for us in some ways was a good thing, enabling us to really help the business make difficult decisions. I can remember HR professionals having to make decisions about layoffs and 401k and compensation. And so you really had to exercise your strategic and analytical muscle during this period of time. So my glass is half full on all this. It always has been. So I really see a shift in the way we're perceived. Our business acumen, I feel like that's getting better and better every day. And so with that comes the second process I'd like to discuss today, and that is the strategic planning process. So if HR professionals want to be viewed as strategic, then what better way than to be involved in the actual strategic planning process? And no matter what methodology you use, there's many methodologies out there, the Blue Ocean strategy, Porter strategies, all kinds of different strategies to use during strategic planning. The important piece is that HR is involved in the beginning, because decisions will be made that I am 100% sure will affect what we do in HR. And HR needs to be aligned to the organizational strategy anyway. So it's critical that we participate on the front end so that we can be proactive in the things that we are designing within HR to help support the business. So let's go over the strategic planning process. First, you have strategy formulation. So at that point in time, that's when all your executives and all the people that are supposed to be involved in planning get in their room and they come up with the vision, the mission, and the company values. Those are sort of the deliverables around the strategic plan. So they go through a creative process to try to agree on where does this company want to go. That's the vision. It should be very motivational, very inspiring. Thinking about American Cancer Society, their vision is to cure cancer. Pretty inspiring. Whereas the mission statement is more directional. It tells us what we do and who we do it for. So the mission statement is very directional. And vision starts high, and then mission gets more granular. And then finally we have the organizational values. So for me, the values speak to how do we behave around here. Things like we are customer focused, integrity, we problem solved, whatever those values are in the organization. And not only do they have to be written down, but they have to be lived. Respect is usually one in companies as well, that we treat our customers and employees with respect. So whatever they are, those are great, but we have to make sure that we also behave in that way. Now, vision and mission sometimes get kind of confused. I'm not so big on the terminology. I'm more about, do we have words or a plan that tells us what we want to be and how we're going to get there? And that's typically how we look at the strategic plan. And then when we come up with those, we know our direction, we know who we want to serve, we go straight into, okay, how are we going to do that? And that's where we get into strategy development. And the typical methodology used there is the age-old, tried and true SWOT analysis. So it's your strengths, your weaknesses, and that's internally focused. And you can get all kinds of data points around what we're doing well and what we need to improve. And then we have our opportunities and threats, which are mostly externally focused. And so the idea is you get a 360 view of, inside the organization and outside the organization and how we need to react as a company. So then phase 3 would be the implementation. So I want you to think about your own companies right now for a second. Think about when you've changed strategy or developed strategy for the first time. And everybody's excited. They've got the strategic plan. It's in the binder. We have new t-shirts and a mug that has our new strategy on it. So where does it fall down? Think about it. Where does strategy fall down? In my experience, it's around execution, because that's the hard part. So we know our direction, we know who we're serving, we've got this great plan that tells us how to get there, but then guess what? Somebody actually has to do the work. And so I think that's where another place where HR can exert its strategic muscle is in that arena, because those changes or those plans and objectives has to get all the way down to the people doing the work. It has to get all the way down to the front line, where the hotel clerk is checking in the guest, where the fast food worker is delivering the sandwich. It has to get down to that level. And so HR has the vehicle, performance management, to be able to cascade those goals from the top to the bottom. And I think that's where we really could use some improvement in that area. That's not this week's topic. Obviously, we can talk more about it in performance management, but that's really where we could add a lot of value, is connecting the dots between strategy and performance management. So implementation is really where the rubber meets the road, but it's really one of the hardest steps, because you've really got to take action at that point. And then finally, the fourth step with strategy is, how did we do? This is the evaluation piece, or the controlling piece, like we talked about earlier. And so we're going to review the strategy. We're going to look at our performance and measure that against goals, and course correct. We're not going to measure at the end. This is something we should be doing monthly, maybe quarterly, I don't know, depending on your business, to make sure that we're going in the right directions, the plans are working, and if not, we can course correct, so we don't have to live with that strategy for a year, while our competitors have the right strategy and are outselling us or what have you. So that's strategic planning, and I would hope that all of you would try to make it known in your organizations that you would like to participate in that process if you're not already, because it's a great learning experience, and you sure will learn a lot about your companies that way. And so one more item as it pertains to the strategic planning piece. Once you participate, once you help with execution and measurement, it's not over yet. HR has to make sure they're tightly aligned with that strategy. So think about a company that has a growth strategy. Would your compensation plans and your recruiting plans be the same if your company was in a mature state? Probably not. So that's what I mean by alignment. So whatever direction the company's going, HR has to be there and going in the same direction, and that's the alignment piece. And so that's critically important for HR to do that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit, let's switch gears and talk about the importance of understand the business and this whole idea of business acumen. Again, I think this is another critical area where HR can really prove that they have credibility and they are strategic by understanding what's going on in the business and understanding the language of the business. And so the book does a great job of talking about each functional area: finance, accounting, marketing, all that. And I'm not going to go through that, because I know we've all worked in companies for some time and we know basically what those functions do. But what I'd like to spend some time on is highlighting the importance of HR understanding the balance sheet, the income statement, cash flow statement, even the end of the year stockholders report, all the ratios that were in the book: gross profit margin, debt to equity, all those sort of things. And so you have to jump in somewhere if you're not that familiar with the balance sheet and the financial statements. And I think what you can do, my advice to you, is go ask your CFO. CFO can become your best friend in this process. The balance sheet summarizes a firm's position at one time. It's assets equals liability plus equity. So in one point in time, it's just, what is a company worth? What are its debts? What are its assets? And what's the equity with the company? So it's a point in time. And contrast that with the income statement. I think most of us refer to that as the P&L. That's where you really learn, for me, that's where I really learn more about the business. So really, it's about the formula of revenue minus expenses equals how much we make, net income. And really understanding how those flow through those statements is, to me, fascinating. And it does take a long time to understand concepts like cost of goods sold, depreciation, amortization, all those type of things. But if you have access to those in your company, or if you're a publicly held company, you can get access to those. Just go start asking questions of your leadership or your CFO or someone in accounting that can explain that to you, so that when that is brought up in conversation in these meetings, that you actually understand and can ask some viable questions. And I promise you, your credibility will go up many, many points. As far as cash flow statements, that's just looking at the ins and the outs as far as your cash. It really is showing you what is your cash position. I know our small company lives and breathes by our cash flow statement. And so, we have an accounts receivable, an accounts payable, things that we have to pay, things that are owed to us. But what is today, tomorrow, next week, and next month? What is our known cash position? Because after all, payroll has to be paid. So that's a interesting statement as well. And so one thing I did forget to mention is budgets. I know for many of us in HR, we're involved in the budgeting process. I will tell you that that's probably where one place I learned a lot about the business. I reported to a CFO at my last corporate job. And at the time, I was just frustrated and kicking and screaming. But hindsight's 2020, and I look back, and that's really where I learned the most. And she made me do the HR budget, and she made me be involved in other areas' budgets as well. And so it really taught me the business, and I'm grateful today because I understand budgeting and I understand financial statements. And had I not had that experience, I probably would not. So I guess my message about all of this is to make sure you understand the business you're in, your competitors, understand the financial statements. And if you don't, and you're not familiar with accounting or accounting concepts, then really get to be best friends with your CFO. And so let me look, what is the next topic? I believe I wanted to talk, oh yes, I wanted to dovetail into, since we're talking about financial measures, I wanted to talk about some that we can use within HR for looking at our different spends within HR. Looking at cost benefits analysis, break-even analysis, and ROI. I believe we've spoken about ROI in HR for a long time because we talk about ROI when we do training, or we talk about ROI when we buy an HRIS or any type of spend like that. And basically, it demonstrates the efficiency with which you use your resources. And you want that ROI obviously to be over 1. So basically what it is the value you receive from the investment minus the cost of the investment divided by the cost of investment times 100. And so is there a magic number for that? No. I think different companies want different levels of ROI. There's another question you can ask the CFO. And you can talk to them about that to see what's important to them, what has been the historical rate of return that they need. And this is different from cost benefit because ROI uses actual cost, hard cost, which is different than the cost benefit analysis. Because a lot of times when you're looking at cost benefit, which is the value of the perceived or projected benefits, and you can get kind of subjective with that, divided by the cost. Sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not. And it's more, it can be more predictive. ROI is actual cost. And a lot of times you look at ROI after the project, cost benefit before the project. So hopefully that makes sense. And then finally, the break-even analysis is an interesting calculation too. We want to know at what time are we going to break even on a certain investment. So it's the cost divided by the savings times time, and that will give us the amount of months or the amount of years it'll take us to break even. And then some CFOs or some individuals in leadership will want to know all three of these. Before, what is our cost benefit projection? Okay, where do we break even, or when do we break even? And then finally, after the fact, well, what was the ROI? What was the actual ROI of this project? So those are very good tools. Again, we're talking about being strategic, heightening our credibility within the organization. So again, these are tools that you can put in your toolkit to be able to be seen as strategic and show, and more importantly, show your impact on the organization, because it's been so difficult for us to do that historically. So hopefully that was helpful. And what I want to talk about next is, towards the end of Module 1, they started talking about statistics, and I'm sure that made you a little nervous. And so I just wanted to clear up what we use these statistical tests for in HR and what they are in layman's terms. And so I know they did a little statistics review about the mean, median, and mode. You can read that. That's not very difficult. And there were samples and answers to questions within the book, so I'm sure you'll be fine on that. What I wanted to talk about is the correlation versus some other statistical tests like regression. So if you'll think about correlation is, do two variables have a relationship? And when you do the math, you can actually do this in Excel with an add-on. It's very simple. If we are looking at, I don't know, employee satisfaction and manager competence. The higher the manager's competence, the more satisfied the employee is. Now that could be a positive correlation. So if we ran the correlation with our data points, we would want that to be closer to 1, because correlation runs from -1, which is a negative correlation, to +1. So if we ran the data with employee engagement scores and satisfaction with management competence scores, and we got a correlation of 0.88, that's a pretty strong positive correlation. So there is a relationship, but we don't know the cause of that relationship. Is it competence in one or two areas? We don't know if it's causal. Which one causes the other? The old chicken and the egg. And then a negative relationship, an example might be the higher one's satisfaction, the lower one's intent to quit. So that would be one's going one way and one's going the other way. So that's a negative correlation. And it might look something like 0.78. Very close to -0.1, so that would be a pretty high negative correlation. So with correlation, we just have to remember that correlation is not causation. My friend Dr. Scott Mondor, who is a brilliant PhD in this arena, always tells me it's like shark attacks and ice cream sales in the summer. Both are high, but they're not correlated. Just because ice cream sales are high doesn't mean that ice cream sales causes shark attacks. So that's how I always remember that. He told me that a long time ago. And then regression analysis. Regression analysis helps to get us closer to causation. So we might take a look at many variables. Where we use regression analysis is thinking about employee satisfaction, as what we're trying to determine what causes employees to be satisfied at XYZ company. And we might look at things like job task, manager satisfaction, opportunity for growth, rewards and recognition, communications. And so we might regress those against employee satisfaction to see which one comes out the strongest. And so what we're trying to do is to get to closest to one as we can. So that's the difficulty with employee engagement, employee satisfaction when we do those surveys. We come out with 60 or so questions and we really don't know which ones we should be focused on. Well, we could do a regression to see which ones have the biggest impact on that outcome of employee satisfaction. So I hope that clears it up. And if not, you feel free to ask me more questions online or in the forums, and we can clear that up. A couple more concepts. Reliability and validity, we'll use those in the areas of testing and performance management. Reliability means that a test has consistent results over time. So think about your PHR, SPHR certification. You want that to be consistent over time, so you want that to be reliable. You also want it to be valid. You want it to test what it's supposed to be testing, so that's around content. So SHRM National said that the content is around these 6 modules: strategic management, risk management, HRD, all those six modules. So if you went to the class, or I'm sorry, if you went and took the test and there was something on there about, I don't know, engineering, then it's not testing what it's supposed to be testing, so it would not be a valid test for the PHR, SPHR. So those are 2 concepts that are useful in the recruiting area, again, if we're doing tests for new hires, and in our performance management area as well. So the final 2 topics in the book were around ethics. Obviously, those have been getting well-needed attention due to what's been going on in our country and environment over the last many, many years, from Enron to the recent financial meltdown. So I'm not going to, that was a very straightforward section, so I think that was pretty self-explanatory, along with the legislative process, how a law, a rule becomes a law, and a bill becomes a law. So I think that, there's even a chart in the book that goes through each step, so I wasn't going to bore you or use up any more of your valuable time for that. Anyway, good luck on your studies. Do well on your module test, and I'll be talking to you very soon.